Hello, I'm Sasha, and welcome to Volume 1 of my new series from Sunshadeau Arts, where I'm going to be documenting the entire process from start to finish of how I take an idea and turn it into a complete dice design. Now, I'm going to be calling these segments the Cauldron Chronicles, and the reason why is because the piece of art that I am inspired to make a die based off of is the Wizards of the Coast Tasha's Cauldron of Everything alternative cover with amazing art by Wiley Becker. This artist creates stunning work, okay? And I would highly recommend going to their website. It's right here. Go check out their art. Support your artists. This artist is amazing. Now, getting back to the actual project, the reason that I chose this particular piece of art is because it's very different from what you traditionally see from Dungeons and Dragons books. You know, all of their covers have a very specific look to them, and they all have kind of a similar style of art. It's part of their brand. And this alternative cover is so completely different from that. Very different style. And I just thought it was so interesting and so beautiful that I really wanted to make a die that was inspired by this piece of art. So I'm going to go through the entire process start to finish. If this is something that you're interested in learning how to do yourselves, you can take my advanced dice making course where I cover this entire process and teach a whole lesson in how to make an idea into a reality. So let's get started. First off, when you are creating a die that's inspired by a specific image, just one image, you have to take that image and break it down into its most fundamental parts, right? So looking here at the cover of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the alternate cover, we can see here that obviously I'm assuming this is Tasha right here. And then we also have this other dude here. And I'm not super up on my D&D lore. Is it a demon? Does she have a demon she summons? I can't quite recall. But we got this other dude here in the background. It looks like he's holding a heart, maybe. And then we've got these faces here. We've got skulls behind here. We of course have the cauldron. It is Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And this really cool, interesting smoke that's coming up out of the cauldron. Now that we've identified the main parts of the image itself, we need to decide what pieces of that image we're going to use for the actual design. Now, it's really hard to do figures well in dice. It's very challenging because it's such a tiny scale. So in this case, I've decided that I'm not going to include the figures for this particular dice design because it just makes it really complicated, and this is something that I'm doing for fun. I don't want to make it really hard. So I'm not going to include Tasha or this kind of demon-y guy, but we can look at sort of the other parts of the main image. We have the cauldron, of course, we have the smoke, we have some of these like kind of skulls and faces, and that'll kind of give me an idea of sort of the main elements that I want to include in this particular die design. So I've decided that I'm going to make the cauldron the focal point for this dice design. And so that's going to be where I'm going to start when I start researching and sourcing everything that I need to make this actual design. Okay, so now we've decided that the cauldron's going to be our focal point. That's going to be the first thing that we want to try and source for creating this die. So now we've got to find ourselves a cauldron, right? Of course, the obvious answer is if you can have it 3D printed. If you have a 3D printer, if you have access to a 3D printer, if you have the capability of designing it, or you can pay someone to do it, of course there's lots of options of how you can get a 3D printed replica, which of course is the simplest, easiest way. But if you don't have access to that technology, or you can't afford or don't want to spend money to hire someone to do it for you, I'm going to kind of go through how to do it without a 3D printer and without just creating exactly what you need. So the first thing we have to do is we have to try and find a cauldron. So what do you look for? You know, you get on Google, what are you supposed to look for? Well, first off, I'm going to look at some tips for Googling. is you would want to Google Cauldron miniatures. Is always a good place to start. You can try dollhouse miniatures. You can try like tabletop gaming, like D&D miniatures. Sometimes you can find what you're looking for there. But a lot of times the miniatures will be too big. So it really is just a matter of scale, of what scale they're in. So another place that you can also look, if you're not having a lot of luck with miniatures, you can also look for beads or charms, because frequently they tend to be a little bit closer to the size spectrum of something that you're going to put in dice. So let's head onto the computer, scoot around Google, see what we can find. Okay, so it's been a couple of weeks and I ordered some cauldrons in the mail, and none of them are the right size. None of them are right at all. This is part of the process. This is part of the process, that none of them were right at all. One was too big, one was too small, one was just ugly. It's part of what happens. It's just part of what happens. Part of the design process. You never get it right on the first try, or you rarely get it right on the first try. So I masked up, took a trip over to Michael's craft store, because that's just my local craft store where I go. And one of the places that's great, again, if you go to a craft store, you want to look in the dollhouse section, the toy section, bead section. So I went all through there, could not find anything at all that would work. And I came home and I was super frustrated because nothing was working. Nothing was working. And then I realized that I was very silly because I made a very, very classic Design 101 error, which is that I didn't bring my reference image with me. I did not look at my reference image at all while I was looking at cauldrons. This is not what you're supposed to do. Okay. It is vitally important when you are designing something that you always have your references with you. You're always looking at your references. It is so, so important. This is like Design 101. You want to have your references with you. And I know there's a whole bunch of debate in the art world about, well, I shouldn't say there's a whole bunch of debate. There's a small group of assholes who think that artists shouldn't use references, and you're not a real artist if you don't use references. And honestly, I think that those people aren't actual artists, because real artists use references. I have a whole YouTube video about that. We'll get into that later. But, it's critical when you're designing that you have your references with you. So the reason you want to always have your references with you is because your brain is a liar. Your brain will lie to you all the time. Your brain lies to you all the time. So, in my head, when I was looking for cauldrons, I just had in my head, okay, I need a cauldron. But my brain was picturing this when I thought of the word cauldron. I was picturing in my head that sort of black cast iron looking thing with little feet and handles, and that just very iconic black witch's cauldron sort of look. Now let's look at our Tasha image. Where on that image do you see a cauldron that looks like that? There isn't one, because the cauldron on this piece of art doesn't look anything like that. So when I say that your brain lies to you, it's like I looked at the image, put in my head the word cauldron, but then my head provided a different image for cauldron than what was actually in the art. So I was kind of really going down the wrong road entirely when I was searching for a cauldron. Okay, so don't do what I got really excited and I wanted to get cauldrons and I just went for it. And then, I've paid the price that I've wasted 3 weeks of time because I was looking for the wrong thing. So looking at the actual image of the cauldron here, well, what can we say about it? I mean, obviously it has this spinal column and the rib cage, which is super cool. Of course, it has that. But if we don't look at that, what else can we say about this cauldron? Well, it has a very narrow top compared to the body of the cauldron. So that's a little bit different from some of the traditional like cast iron cauldrons that you might think of. It's white, so it's not black. It doesn't have any feet on it. I mean, maybe this cauldron has feet, but it's not in the image. So we're not going to assume it has feet. It doesn't have handles or any of that. So you can see how so much of what the image that my brain provided for me when I thought of the word cauldron is not at all like what this particular cauldron actually looks like. So that's why it's super important to always have your references right there with you when you're researching. So now looking more carefully at this cauldron, it doesn't have a lot of features of a traditional cauldron. So I can look at what it looks like to me and think of other objects that this cauldron looks like. And really, it looks a lot like a pot or some sort of like large vase or vessel of some kind. So then that gives us another search avenue to try and find the miniature that we're looking for. And I actually happened to recall that I already had something that might work in my stock. So I went to my work table and I have all these little drawers full of little things. And in one of the drawers, I had, it was from a dollhouse set, and it's a complete set of teacups and bowls and coffee pots and different types of containers. It was from a dollhouse set, and I had purchased it for the teacups for my Tea of the Dead dice. So I had this little like dollhouse miniature set, and I didn't really think of it in the right way when I first saw it, because I saw this shape and I think it's supposed to be like, it's almost like a cookie jar. It's like a vessel. I can't think of the right word. It's kind of like a jar or a vessel, and with a little lid, but it's brown. So I didn't immediately make the association, because I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's not white, it's brown. And so it's really easy for color to distract you. So you always want to make sure that you're not focusing on the color, you're focusing on the shape, the outline, the silhouette of what it is, and not the color, which can be really hard when you're first starting out to separate the color from the shape, because you can always change the color. So easy to change the color of things, harder to change the shape. So if you find something that's the right shape and it's the wrong color, that's an easy fix. So I made a little silicone mold of this design. I poured it with white resin, and bam, look at that. That looks pretty dang close to Tasha's cauldron. So learn from my mistakes. Don't waste 3 weeks for things to come from Etsy and then make unnecessary trips to the craft store when you have literally what you need right in a drawer on your freaking desk. So this is why you always look at your references when you are sourcing materials. So I now have this really cool pot miniature from a dollhouse miniature that is going to become the base for my cauldron. So that's it for our volume 1 of the Cauldron Chronicles, where I will be converting an amazing piece of art and inspiring it into die form. And we'll see what happens in the next part of the adventure. We have to try and get that rib cage and spinal column onto that cauldron. I'll be excited to see how I do that. I'll be excited to see how I do that. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'm brilliant. I can figure it out, right? So, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the rest of the journey. This video has been edited down for YouTube. To view the entire extended version, become a patron of Sunshadeau Arts on Patreon. And by the way, patrons also get to participate in the design process. To peruse my wares, visit sunshadowart.com and be sure to connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Sunshadeau Arts.